Welcome to this overview of land use data for the community of Franconia's master plan. This overview has been put together with North Country Council in our role in assisting the planning board in updating the 2008 master plan. Today in this recording, we're going to focus on land use, but included in with land use is a bit of demographic information about the residents of Franconia, because land use is at its heart about what we use the land for, but also about who is here to use the land. We're going to start by talking about what land use is and why we plan for it. So land use is really as simple as it sounds. It is all of the physical ways in which we use or develop land. It can include places where people live in residential development, places we work in commercial or industrial development, areas that we conserve for their natural resources, recreation areas, and places where we farm or forest through agricultural or silvicultural uses. And we include land use in a master plan because at its heart, a community's master plan is a land use plan. It is a plan that's goal is to help the community see what sort of policies, regulations, programs might be applicable to the goals it has for how to use that land. At the end of the day, a community is a group of people who share an area of space, and that area of space are the town boundaries. So land use is really the core of a community's master plan. It provides important guidance for decision makers, developers, residents, and business owners about the community's vision. It also provides protection, looks at what development is appropriate, and considers the use and management of land and natural resources within the community. And we know Franconia is rich with those natural resources. Now I'm going to touch quickly on how to use this guide. The purpose of this guide is to help the planning board understand what available information we can gather about land use and how to think about incorporating it into your master plan update. The data we collected here was prepared by North Country Council in our role in assisting the planning board, and we pulled it from a wide variety of data sources as are available. Some of those are federal data sources, others are state-based resources, and some are local. What to expect in here is an overview of those data, an explanation of what's being put forward on these slides, and a bit of reflection on how land use goals have been considered in your last master plan and what questions you might want to explore as a board as you're undertaking this new update in 2023. The first topic we're going to hop into today is population trends, and there's quite a bit of information here. So we're going to talk about what we see in Franconia, and then we're also going to compare that to what we see in Grafton County as a whole, because sometimes focusing in on the community and then zooming out to look at the county it's a part of can give us a bit of perspective on how these numbers compare to other places, particularly those other places in close proximity to your community. We're also going to look at them over time because that's another way to add perspective here. The numbers here look back quite a bit over the last decades so that we can see any trends or changes that have happened over time as well. Now, let's jump into what we see on the screen. On the left side of the screen, we see a chart about median age of residents. And that chart compares, like we said, Franconia to Grafton County. There are two pretty clear takeaway messages from what we see here on this chart. First, we see that over the last 21 years, and these are data years, so our most recently available data was 2021, and we look back to the year 2000. The median age in Franconia has gone up by 11.3 years. And looking at that line alone, it's simple to see that that is actually a pretty steep rate of increase, particularly when you look at it compared to the Grafton County line beneath it. During that same period of time, we have seen the average age in Grafton County increase as well, but at a much slower pace. During that same 21-year period, the average age in Grafton County has gone up by 5.7 years. So the rate of population aging when it comes to the median age in Franconia has gone up about twice the rate it has compared to the county as a whole. The second thing we can take away from this is that the sheer gap between these lines shows us that Franconia has for quite some time been one of the older communities in Grafton County. Back in 2000, there was about a 10-year age gap in that median age for the communities. Fast forwarding to 2021, we see that gap grow to be about a 15-year age gap. Now, we talk about these average ages because it helps us understand that with an average age of 58.4, there are a lot of seniors in the community of Franconia, and seniors might have different land use needs. It can also help us see that we don't have a ton of young residents, because that would sort of pull this number down, right? So we can see a concentration of seniors and a lower amount of younger residents. And those needs change for folks over time. So in your community, your goals, what people need as far as accessibility of homes, social connection, access to transportation, all of these things change at different points throughout our life. And seniors have different needs, concerns, and considerations than, say, working age families or young adults. So we can use this information to help really discuss what it is to be in a growing, aging community. Looking over to the right side of the screen and in the center, let's talk a little bit about the tables we see. So these tables group populations into different categories. Those under 19, so kids, those 20 to 59, who we roughly call working age adults, and those 60 and older, who we're going to call seniors for today. These tables also show us the total population numbers for the community. And we look back to 1990. What we can see here is that Franconia's population seemed to hit a high point in 2010 with a little over, well, almost actually 1,300 residents. This went up from 2000 when we saw about 950. But then as we look to more recent years, in 2020, we've seen that number come down a little bit. And in 2021, we see that trend continue with now 989 residents counted in Franconia. It is worth noting that the pandemic and where people were moving and present during the time that things like the 2020 census were occurring can create some anomalies or oddities in our numbers. And so it's worth sort of discussing whether or not this holds true, but these numbers are exact in that sense, but it does seem to be a clear pattern that the population in Franconia seemed to hit a high around 2010 and is slightly lower now. The next thing we're going to do is look across each of these year columns and think about, in each one of those age categories we broke out, what share of the population was in what category. So that's what those percentages under the raw numbers in each cell of this table mean. In 2000, we saw that about 20% of the population was under 19, 51% was that working age group, and 29% were seniors. In 2010, we see the number of children start to go down a bit. The number of working age adults stays pretty solid, and the number of seniors goes up a bit. In 2020, again, we can see that compared to the decade prior, the number of children in the community drops quite a bit, from 17% down to 10%. Here also, we see the number of working age adults going down as well, down to 46% from 50%. And we, however, don't see the same decline occur in the senior population. In 2020, we see that the senior population has actually grown to 44% of the population, up from 33% a decade prior. By 2021, we see a little bit of fluctuation here with the number of children. We're up to 13%. We see a continued decline in the number of working age adults down to 40% of the population. And again, we see a continual increase in the number of residents senior and older, 60 and older, my apologies. The table all the way to the right compares this, as I said, to Grafton County. And what we can see there is that in all of the decades, the number of children present in Grafton County as a share of the total population is higher than it is in Franconia. It also tends to be higher for working age adults and lower for the share of seniors in the community. Now, there are a few reasons that this can happen in a community, and it's important to think about and discuss what these numbers might be indicating for what is actually happening in the lives of people in your community. So these population trends, they can be indicative of a few different things. And like I said, it's really through discussion and understanding your community well from being residents there that you can make these numbers come to life a bit. There might be a few reasons that we see these sort of trends with a continually growing share of older adults. We'll start on this one. First, it may be that the stability of the population in Franconia has stayed about the same. So the same people may roughly be in the community, but as we all do, time has gone forward and they have aged. And so with that, the average age might just be going up because time keeps going forward and it's a pretty stable population in the community. It can also indicate that a growing number of seniors are moving into the community. This is also a common occurrence in many northern New Hampshire towns. It can be a very popular retirement destination for many folks, and so the increasing share of seniors might be that as well. It also could be both. On the younger side, the numbers we can see, this declining rate of young adults and children, it can also indicate that perhaps working age adults and families are not moving into Franconia, which could happen for a number of reasons. Perhaps it's a difficult housing market to enter. Perhaps it's not a terribly attractive community to young adults and working folks. And I would venture that perhaps it is more the first as opposed to the second of those. But like I said, as residents of the community, it's through discussing it you can think about why these trends might be occurring and what they mean. It's also important to note that there are changes in the numbers of young adults who exist in our communities, period, because in recent decades we've seen a trend towards fewer and fewer children in each household. So some of it can just be our household formation trends. We tend to have smaller households on average than we did 20 and 30 years ago, which means we have more folks living alone, which could lead to the decline or the decrease in working age adults if there's 1 or 1.5 present in a household instead of 2. And it also means that as people have fewer children, we might be seeing those numbers for children go down for that reason. When we think about this compared to the county average, we've also seen that overall, Grafton County is seeing a decline in the number of children in their communities. The workforce 20 to 55 numbers also seem to have a downward trend, but at a slightly slower rate than we see in Franconia as a whole. And the senior population in Grafton County is growing as well, but it makes up a far lesser share. So in 2021, we see 28% of Grafton County residents being 60 and older, and in Franconia, we see that number actually jump up to 47% of the population. On the last slide, we looked back to understand population trends, and here we're going to actually look forward as well. So here, what we'll see is a chart that shows us those total population numbers, which were written in the table on the last slide. But we actually move forward from the year 2020 through the year 2050 to project the population trends we expect to see in Franconia. So now I want to talk a little bit about what a population projection is, what it's based on, and then we'll talk about what it shows us here. Over the last few years, all 9 of New Hampshire's regional planning commissions worked together on a project that included redoing population projections for the state with the help of a consultant who helped us sort of all do this in concert together. And that consultant was an expert in population projections. The model we used thinks about natural increase in population change, which is a result of birth and death trends we have seen, as well as migration trends, which is how many people have been moving into and out of what places recently. Those two things are put together and go into this model, which shows us a projection of what we can see in the population overall based on who's moving into and out of areas and who is being born and who is passing away in our communities. It's important to know that population projections can help us understand and think about a future scenario that may come to fruition, but they're certainly not a crystal ball. There are several things that aren't considered in population projections, and as we know, certain events can change what we expect to see happen quite a bit. In the last few years, we watched the COVID-19 pandemic make fundamental changes in where we saw people moving and living. And so things like that, certainly, like I said, there's no crystal ball. They're not forecasted in here. So this gives us an understanding, but it's important to realize it is certainly not a roadmap or something that is guaranteed to be our outcome. Now, with that sort of qualifier in mind, what we see in Franconia is that the population from 2020 moving forward slowly grows at a pretty modest rate until it reaches a high of just under 1,200 residents right around the year 2035. Then from 2035, looking forward to 2050, so about 30 years from now, we start to see in those latter 15 years, the population levels out, and then in between 2045 and 2050 begins to dip down slightly. And that largely has to do with the share of seniors in our population and the passing on that may begin to occur across the board in our birth and death rates. We expect to see death rates exceed birth rates as we move into the 2040 and on period of time, and that is largely why this model shows the population rising slightly from where it is today, leveling out, and then perhaps beginning to dip down. The next topic we're going to explore is household income. So what this table here shows us is that Franconia sees a lower median income than Grafton County and the state of New Hampshire as a whole. Considering this fact, it's worth recognizing that this can illustrate different scenarios for us. First, given Franconia's high share of seniors, income might be limited or fixed, and it might not all be an exact measure of people's wealth or the resources they have available to access money and meet their needs. We know that seniors, while they tend to have more fixed or limited incomes, may also be folks who have accumulated some wealth or savings that can help them make ends meet. And I would venture that we're largely seeing Franconia's lower income be a tie to that. However, it could also be that in general, Franconia earns a little bit less than what we see in Grafton County. So this is another one where the data point alone is best understood when you think about what you experience in your communities. what incomes look like for you, your neighbors, in your community, your friends in Franconia. Now we're going to shift a little bit more into land use statistics that talk to us about the physical land present, as opposed to the number of people and age and income of folks who are part of the community. Here we talk about land area and development. Franconia physically occupies 65.7 square miles of space. However, 71.9% of that land is permanently protected as either White Mountain National Forest or State Park. That leaves less than 30% of that land area for other uses and development in the community. Of that remaining land, we see that 89% of the land is used for residential development, and just shy of 10% is available for commercial development. Now we're going to look at a different data source and zoom in a little bit closer on this idea of how the physical land in Franconia presents itself. So, what we're looking at here is a breakdown of land cover types in Franconia. And on the next slide, we're going to have a visual to support this. So if you're a visual person, feel free to toggle back and forth between this and the next slide. The information presented here comes from the National Land Use Cover Database, and it's something that our GIS systems are able to access through a New Hampshire Granite statistic database available. It helps us see what portions of the community contain what types of environments, both including those environments that have been adjusted by people as developed land, and that which is still in a natural state, including wetlands, forests, farmlands, and open waters. From this table, we can see that crops and pastures take up a very small share of land in the community. Forests, unsurprisingly, take up the vast majority, and that physically developed space only occupies less than 4% of the land area in the community. Now, these figures are based on the observed land cover. So for example, if a home sits on a 10-acre parcel of land, but the yard and the home itself only occupies, say, half an acre of space, only that smaller half-acre share of land appears as developed, because this is based on analysis of the land cover present, as opposed to, say, what land is zoned for what purposes. So now let's go to the next slide and we'll look at this. Here we can see those location trends we talked about on the last slide. We can see that development closely follows the road networks. That is that pink color, really following our road networks quite tightly. We can also see that there is a bit of concentration of development near the village center and downtown area of Franconia. We can also see that wetlands are somewhat isolated, and they loosely follow our lower areas near rivers and streams like the Ham Branch and Meadow Brook. We can also see that there is some isolated open water, largely the lakes we see down in the state park. And also that there's very limited crop and pasture land, but what is present tends to, again, be located in our river areas right along the flow of those rivers, which is a pretty natural thing we've seen over time. Now, when we think about what land can be used for, we're going to look a little bit about the zoning districts that exist in Franconia today. Today, Franconia's developable land area is divided in between 5 different base zoning districts, which allow for different densities of residential development and different mixes of commercial or industrial uses. Those residential densities can range from 5 acres per unit down to 1 acre per unit, depending on where you are. Within Franconia, some land is supported by a public drinking water system. However, the majority is served by private wells, and no public wastewater system exists in the town. This can restrict how much density can actually be supported and accommodated by the land, and probably has a bit to do with the size of the lots required in your zoning districts. Thinking back to your 2008 master plan, as a land use plan, it should surprise no one that there are a good number of goals and objectives that we found related to land use. I'm going to read those through here now to give a bit of time to think and reflect on them. And similar to the other topics we've discussed, we'll have a few guiding questions to follow up on this. Now, here are the goals and objectives from your 2008 master plan that you might want to reconsider and reevaluate going into this 2023 version. When planning for future residential development, allow for a variety of housing options. Support open space development and the protection of natural resources. Support the protection of scenic views and ridgelines. Evaluate lands to be protected from development, as well as areas where development could meet the needs of affordability and/or protection of town character. Investigate state statutes that address water levels and water contaminations related to septic systems. Look into adopting a groundwater protection ordinance. Consider referencing the Shoreland Protection Act to address any shoreland/river protection issues. Look into regulations for swimming pools and hot tubs. New businesses should fit within the rural village character. Consensus is to not allow for large retailers and chain stores, regulations on size, landscaping, architectural features, and other design standards could be developed to make any large business comply with the character of the existing commercial district. Consider public purchase of land for conservation purposes and to protect mountain views. Continue to develop and protect the town's recreational assets. Consider burying utility lines and examining other beautification projects. Examine land parcels in Franconia to be put into a land trust. Now, anytime we look at new data or new trends going on with land use in a town and we're updating our master plans, it's important to think about what we saw in our last master plan and ask a bit of critical questions on those goals and aspirations. 1, is that goal or objective still relevant, or does it need to be adjusted to fit a new future? Since time has evolved, our conditions do too, and sometimes our goals just need to be updated a bit or refined. 2, think about if there are other additional goals or objectives you have for the community that weren't part of your 2008 master plan, but are important today. And 3, think about and take some pride in the steps you've already made towards meeting these goals. Maybe some have been met already. Maybe there's good progress happening towards others. And as always, maybe some need a little bit of clarification. If some of these things are goals or objectives you're unsure how to accomplish, perhaps you need to look into breaking them more into bit-sized, digestible steps you could make and make that path towards accomplishing these things a little bit clearer if they're still relevant goals, but you've struggled to make progress towards them. A couple more guiding questions to consider as you start to think through your land use chapter is, does the current growth pattern respect and reflect the natural resource context of the municipality? Also think about, what are the best qualities of the existing neighborhoods in your municipality? Are there any barriers in the zoning code or other regulations that prevent enhancing these existing places or building new spaces with similar qualities? How can you think about the ways that the town's actions, policies, and programs can support the types of growth you want to see happening in Franconia, and make sure that that growth is responsible and connected to the context of the greater environment on which Franconia sits? Now, if you have questions, comments, clarifications, little tweaks to these data as presented, get in touch with Monica. And as we've said in a few other of these recordings, We will all come back together later this fall to discuss this packet with you all and think about what this means for the update to your master plan and what might want to be some of your aspirations in this newest update. Thank you all for your time.